Welcome. Thank you for joining us at Empowering Creatives to Live Their Dreams. I'm Jessica Osrak. Today we have the VP of MBE Group and former CEO and owner of Growth Machine, which was acquired by MBE Group. Let's welcome Nora Schlesinger. Welcome, Nora.
I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, so you started your career as a food blogger.
I did. I that was actually a hobby, believe it or not. I started my career right out of college in the music industry. So I've been all over the map, but the career arc that I'm in now did start in food blogging, which was sort of a side project when I was in grad school that came out of my love of cooking for my friends and classmates because we were going to classes after work. So it was a very long day and cookies really perked everybody up.
Yeah.
So, because I was going to school in the evenings and weekends while I was working full time, when grad school ended, I had so much time on my hands and I had kind of forgotten how to just relax and have free time. So, food blogging is something that I had been really interested in and a very enthusiastic follower of and sort of aspired to for a long time. I've been a photographer my whole life, and food photography was something that interested me. So I kind of thought, now is a good time. I have the time, I have the energy, I have the sort of wherewithal for it. So I started this food blog. It ended up being a really important part of my life as I dealt with a lot of digestive related health problems for many years. The food blog allowed me to keep myself honest, keep myself on track with the elimination diet that was very tough and I had to follow for a long time, but it gave me a creative outlet. It was great. And then so I've been working this whole time while I was running this food blog. It was probably, I don't know, 4 years, 5 years or something. And then my first son was born. My day job was not very conducive to being the kind of parent that I wanted to be. There was a lot of crazy hours and travel, and at the time, a lot of commuting and things like that. And so I left really without a plan. My plan, in fact, was I had begun to monetize my food blog. And so I thought, well, this will tide me over. Maybe it'll turn into a business, maybe, which that was a thing at the time that people were turning their food blogs, their sort of hobby blogs into businesses. Um, I was doing a lot of side work, white label work where I was photographing or recipe developing for brands, and they would post it on their website or, whatever, do whatever with it. And I thought, well, these are revenue streams that I can work with. But what ended up happening is I hated being a solopreneur, but I really loved the content creation. The sort of core of it was content creation, and I really loved that. And I especially loved the sort of game of SEO, not to minimize it because it's a lot more complex than just like a fun game, but there is this, I don't know, this sort of, it's like you play this game with Google almost. So I was really loving learning about SEO, seeing the effects, the positive effects on my traffic as I would implement new SEO learnings and strategies. And I realized, actually, this is what I want to do. I don't want to be a solopreneur. I don't want to be the person who's responsible for everything. I don't really enjoy social media marketing, for example. There was a lot of video creation at the time that I really wasn't interested in. There was just a lot of stuff that I hated, frankly, about running this blog as a business. So I also just didn't want to work alone anymore. So I went out and looked for a job in content creation and weirdly found this startup that was like very, very early stage. I don't even think they had a website at the time. I was hired as the first full-time employee,
Okay.
and negotiated a much bigger role than was originally listed. I think the original job post was for like a marketing manager or something that like didn't fit my the place I was in my career. So I negotiated a bigger role for myself. That company was Growth Machine. And I think it's important to specify that I'm not the founder of Growth Machine. I did end up owning the company, which we can talk about in a minute, but I wasn't the founder. but I was the first full-time hire and helped build the business.
Okay. And so when did you join Growth Machine? About what year was that?
It was January of 2018.
2018. Okay.
Mhm.
And you said that you applied to a marketing manager job. Do you remember what role you negotiated for?
Yeah, it was on par with what I had left at the consulting firm that I had quit when my son was born,
Okay.
at the end of 2016. So it was like senior, no, what was it? I think it was like director of client strategy or something like that. I know that it had to have like strategy and director in the title because that was my old title was I was a research director at my old agency, or my old consulting firm, but it was like a strategy track. So I just kind of pulled buzzwords from my old title and pitched this new title. And that's actually very similar to what the job, not my job, but like the person who's doing that job now, it's very similar to what the title still is. And I made it up out of thin air.
Okay. Interesting. I love that. It sounds like you got an idea and you rolled with it.
Yeah,
Took a chance.
definitely. Yeah, it's funny because like as I go back and think about my career path over the last 7-ish years, I would not consider myself a very risk tolerant person, but
Okay.
I've taken a lot of like wild swings and things that I would consider like pretty decent risks. And honestly, it's so unlike me, but it just felt like I can handle this at the time. And so I just did it. It just felt like the right step at the time. I didn't really think that I had anything to lose. And like I said, this was like an early stage startup. It wasn't I mean, to be frank, like it wasn't that intimidating. It wasn't like I was going to like Google or like, a big like bank or some big established like intimidating business and being like, I want to be a director. It was just like a guy who ended up being a very good friend and business partner. But at the time, like I didn't know this person. And I was like, look, I know the job description says X, but like my experience, my expertise, my education really dictates that I'm at a higher level. So like I made a case for myself, just to be clear. I wasn't like, I don't want this title, I want that title. I made the case for it. I backed it up with data and my experience. And, I could show that I had grown my own blog to, a certain amount of traffic and I had done all this work and kind of was able to show him what I could do. And so I justified it and justified it well enough that he went for it.
So if you look back at like your career and the transitions that you made, have you always been able to advocate for yourself, or did it come
No.
out of some recent experience that you had had up until that point?
Yeah, I love that question because it's been a huge realization to me that like at a certain point, I think I just looked at myself and my capabilities different and maybe like gave, fewer Fs, so to speak. And I think what really changed was I became a parent. And so I was forced to embrace a certain kind of authority that I didn't see myself having prior to that. Suddenly you're advocating for this small, helpless being, you're setting boundaries, you're eventually, at the time he was tiny, but, eventually throughout my last 8 years as a parent, I've had to learn limits and discipline and boundaries, and you start believing in yourself as a different. Like this has been my experience as a parent. I really was forced to kind of get over a lot of my self-doubt and my questioning myself and my abilities. I'm not saying that I don't still question and doubt myself and have the same imposters. Like everyone has imposter syndrome, um, especially women, but you have to learn to stand up for yourself to a certain degree as a parent. And it's sort of this trial by fire thing, but you are forced to do it. You're forced to have a lot of practice. And suddenly I've noticed it's become a little easier. But prior to having kids, no, I had a very hard time standing up for myself in any realm of my life. I had terrible imposter syndrome all the time, still do sometimes. but I didn't have, I had very little confidence in myself relative to, I think, what I have now. I wouldn't look at myself and be like, yeah, I have so much confidence in myself. But I look at the things that I've been able to do and succeed at. And so I must have some level of, like the fact that I'm able to just be like, this is the right next step and do a hard thing. That's a form of confidence, even if you don't label it as confidence. So, um, I think this was an example, where I thought I'm worthy of more than what's being offered. I can back that up. I don't, like I said, like I'm not going in being like, I deserve more because
Mhm.
I showed like, because I'm me. It's not like an unearned confidence. It's a very hard one confidence. I was able to go in and say, you were asking for these qualifications. I have all those and this entire mountain of other qualifications and experience and a master's degree in the future. Like he would be like, yeah, I don't know why someone with an MBA even applied for this job. And for me, it was like, I really wanted a job where I could be fully remote. I could be there for my kid when I needed to. I could do the kind of work I wanted to do. And so I thought, like, what do I have to lose? Yes, this ticks the boxes, but it's not like the only job out there. Um, Also, remote work wasn't like a thing back then. So I was just kind of on the phone with this guy. Like it felt very casual. So I think I was a little bit less intimidated, and the context made me less apt to question myself and whether I deserved to be there and belonged in this role. But I think the experience of being a parent was the thing that I didn't realize it at the time, but now looking back was a big turning point in my level of self-confidence and finally like uh shedding some of the imposter syndrome that I was carrying.
Wonderful. So you mentioned that you're not the founder of Growth
Right.
Machine, but you did end up being the CEO and the owner. So how did
Yeah.
that happen?
Um, so this company was sort of started a little bit by accident. The founder was freelancing, doing this SEO focused content work for a couple of brands. And through word of mouth, other clients came to him and he realized I can't do this all by myself. So he incorporated and started hiring freelancers. And then eventually the freelancers were not enough. So he hired first me and then a team. In 2020, everyone had a very stressful year to say the least. And he realized like this wasn't what he set out to do. He never thought my aspiration is to own and run a marketing agency. And he just realized he wanted to pursue the things that he kind of was passionate about. And not that he wasn't, I think he enjoyed this work. He didn't enjoy running the agency on a day-to-day basis. And he didn't enjoy the like the HR and the finance and the nitty gritty of running the business. And I really did. And I was doing a lot of it at that point anyway, not to devalue his contributions in any way, but he was just able to be really honest with himself and then with me and say, I don't want to do this. I want to go pursue other things. And he said, would you like to run the agency? And I was like, okay, what do I have to lose? It turned out to be probably the hardest time to run any business, but particularly like a digital marketing agency when I took over in 2021. The economy was just a mess. And anytime the economy is uncertain, people start cutting marketing budgets and marketing spend, marketing activities are the first to go. So our client base shifted a lot. It's been a very challenging couple of years. I also had a second baby in that time. But I just kind of kept plugging away at it. And when he stepped down, our agreement was that he would effectively be like the board. He would kind of be there for like higher level strategic decision making. We would have check-ins periodically. Like I would be doing the day-to-day sort of like hands-on work of running the agency, but he would be involved sort of strategically. That ended up not happening because he ended up pivoting so far from marketing that he wasn't in the mindset to be like weighing in on industry strategy. And that was fine. That was that was just what it was. And I saw what he was doing and how passionate he was about it. He ended up pivoting into crypto. And then he's been a writer all this time. And so now he's written about his experience trading crypto. And now is writing another book. And so he's way, 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 distanced himself from the work that we're doing at Growth Machine, or we were doing when we were Growth Machine. And I kind of thought like, look, I'm doing all this work to build this agency. It's incredibly strenuous, difficult, taxing work that's taking a lot out of me, taking me away from my family, my bandwidth, my time. I would lay awake at night thinking about the agency, and I'm just like, I don't own this. I'm acting like an owner. I'm putting my heart and soul into this project, but someone else owns it who doesn't participate at all. And he had moved, like, just to be clear, like, there's no bad blood or conflict or anything. It was just like, I kind of went to him and I was like, look, I mean, this is how it's shaken out. I think it would make sense to kind of close the loop and make you officially no longer part of the business. I would really like to buy out your shares so that I can feel like on paper, like my job matches what I do in reality on a day-to-day basis.
Mhm.
Um, and we had a very frank conversation, and I said, I don't want this hanging over your head. Like, yeah, I want you to be able to sort of freely move into whatever job, whatever pursuit that you're excited about. Basically, I said, let's just have some closure here, and we can both move into kind of our next chapters fully. And he agreed, and that was that. I bought him out, and then I suddenly own a marketing agency, which was not at all something I ever aspired to or set out to do. But this is one of those examples where I was just kind of like, in retrospect, I'm like, who does that? That is insane. But at the time, it just felt like the natural next step in the progression of my work and what I was doing, at the company.
Okay. No, that's great. And I love that you are really checking in with yourself and then believing in yourself and taking the action and having those frank conversations, which aren't always easy to have.
Yeah, that's another thing that I think the combination of parenthood and this job, any leadership role, if you're doing it right, you're going to have hard conversations.
Mhm.
But there's, I think, a real art to having hard conversations without damaging the relationship. And that's something that I've really been working on. Again, not saying I'm perfect at it or the expert at it, but it's something that every time I've had a hard conversation, I've tried to use it as an opportunity to practice the skill of not making it personal. I mean, it's always going to be a little personal. Like I've had to fire people. I've had to have some really tough conversations, but um, I think that keeping the humanity first and foremost in the interaction at
Mhm.
least helps. So I've fired people who hate me now, and that's just the nature of the job. But I've also what it's not always like it's not like I'm firing people all the time, but I've had tough conversations with people that we were able to move through it. And this conversation with the founder, for example, like it was extremely positive. I think that people are always shocked to hear that we're still on great terms. We're friends. We talk every once in a while. He lives in Texas and I live in Illinois, so it's not like we like see each other. But we still have a very good relationship. I still cheer him on. I'm happy for him, in writing his next book and all that. Um, we just don't like work together anymore, but it was all very positive. And I also have learned that like working with people who share that priority of keeping the relationship and the humanity sort of first and foremost in any interaction is extremely important. Um, but yeah, I mean, learning to have those hard conversations well, if that's the word, has been a huge management lesson for me over the last several years.
Sounds like an important lesson.
It has been for me. I think that a lot of people who care about their team want to avoid upsetting them or having hard conversations or delivering bad news. And no one benefits from that. You know, you have to have those conversations. You have to be transparent with your employees and your team. You have to share bad news sometimes. You have to fire people occasionally, hopefully not too often. But the effect of not having those hard conversations is much, much worse than the effect of having them.
Mhm.
So you may as well kind of, in my opinion, you may as well kind of learn to have them effectively and have them in the least sort of damaging way possible,
Mhm.
or at least try your best. Doesn't always
Yeah.
work.
Yeah, so I love that you see it as practice. So, are there any tips that you can give as far as approaching a tough conversation? Because I
Yeah.
believe that everything is energy.
I'm not like a very woo-woo person. Like anyone who knows me knows that I'm like very rational and very like, let's solve the problem, like whatever. But yeah, I very much believe in sort of the energy and connecting with people on like where they are on their wavelength. And so I always say everything is about empathy first. And so I say that about our work, even. I say that about our client relationships. I certainly say that about our team relationships. I think that goes doubly so for really hard conversations where you have to empathize first. I always think about, like, if I was on the other end of this, how would it feel? Like, what would I want to hear? Not necessarily what is, I'm not egotistical enough to think I can like fix it or make it okay or make it not suck for the person if they're getting bad news. But it's more just like, how can I make them feel seen, heard? How can I not come off as like flip about this? How can I communicate that this was not easy, that I deeply value them as a human, as a team member, as a friend in many cases, while also saying, unfortunately, this has to happen. Unfortunately, this has happened, whatever the thing is. So honesty, empathy, transparency to the point that is appropriate, of course. You can't always share every single detail of every single thing with every single person, but I always try to share as much information as I can. So just making people feel like they're not seen as sort of pawns in some sort of like bizarre business chess game, which a lot of my friends who work for big corporate entities kind of articulate feeling like that. And so I've been very, very careful to do everything in my power to try to not make people feel that way. As much empathy and transparency and honesty as possible really would be my maybe one and only, but certainly most important advice.
Okay. And talk to me about these acquisitions.
Yeah.
So, you went through an acquisition at Growth Machine to MBE.
Hmm. Yes.
From what I understand, this was not your first experience of
Right.
acquisition. So, can you
Right.
tell us about your former experience
Yeah.
and how that compared to your most recent experience with MBE?
Absolutely. Yeah, I actually like this is one of those things where sometimes stuff happens and you're like, this just sucks. And then like 1, 5, 10 years down the road, you're like, oh, now I understand why that happened because I learned something that I can now use, but I never thought that I'd be in the position to actually get to use this prior learning. So I mentioned that when my first son was born, I left the consulting firm that I was working for. A big reason why the culture changed in a way that, prompted me to leave was because they were acquired by a massive research marketing conglomerate thing like Monster. Prior to that, they had been a very small, very sort of human focused. That's a weird way to describe it, but like it had been a very, very small consultancy that we were a very tight-knit team. I was friends with literally everybody I worked with. Um, Everyone was so smart and interesting and creative, and I just had so much respect for everybody there. Um, and we were able to sort of work in a way that was very fulfilling, very intellectually stimulating. And then suddenly things started to change. So I was there for, I want to say something like 6-ish years. So in the initial couple of years, it was like this sort of like pseudo academic, very like I'm like very nerdy and I love, analyzing data and all this stuff. And so it was like very there was space for us to be creative and explore all this data and come up with these like incredible insights for our clients. And then it started to feel like the walls were closing in. And so it would be like instead of working on one project, you suddenly had to work on two at a time at all times. And so we finally, like I said, I worked with a lot of really smart people. Like they weren't going to get anything by us. So we finally realized, oh, they're trying to position us to be acquired. And I was a strategist, like I wasn't on the management team or anything, but it was just very clear. So we all knew what was going on and it just kept getting worse and worse. So they did all this cost cutting stuff. They moved us into this, we had a very spacious office in downtown Evanston, which is like a really cool college town just north of Chicago where Northwestern is. And it is a great downtown. And so we had this great little office space in this really cool old building and we could walk to like all the shops and restaurants in downtown. It was like a very nice place to work. Suddenly we were in this weird part of Evanston in this teeny little, like, not even real office, and we were all crammed in. And it was all this stuff kept happening.
Mhm.
Um, so they were gradually sort of chipping away at all the things that made it a great place to work, and in turn, chipping away at how valued we felt as employees, um, and sort of how motivated we felt at the same time. And they did eventually sell. Like I said, they sold to this gigantic conglomerate. We got about 4 hours or so, maybe like 6 hours notice. It was like we all gathered in the conference room at whatever o'clock and well, okay, 8 hours. It was like 4 o'clock they told us and they were like, it takes place midnight tonight. And we were like, what the heck? We really felt like afterthoughts or like kind of like pawns in this lucrative, I don't know what it sold for, but like I imagine it sold for a decent amount of money. And we were just sort of used to make sure that the owner and board and whoever else owned equity in this company like really made out as best as possible. Then we were sold to this company that completely changed how we worked. We had been hybrid before hybrid was a thing. This was way pre-pandemic. So I was going into the office like one day a week. I was super pregnant, so that was really important to me. And I was really sick my whole pregnancy. I don't think I went into the office for like my entire first trimester. And that's how I made it work. That's how I was able to continue to work and be pregnant and not have a super pleasant pregnancy. But suddenly it was like, you have to commute to downtown Chicago. You have to, like, every single day, you have to work with this team of people that, like, doesn't quite get what you do. And it doesn't really speak the same language. And we were sort of expected to, like, train them to do what we did. And we were like, you can't just, like, train, you have to have the right brain to do this work. So we felt very commoditized. Um, it was just, it was just terrible.
Mhm.
And sure enough, a big chunk of the team ended up quitting in the maybe year-ish after the acquisition was closed. So that was my experience being on the other side of the acquisition. So then fast forward however many years, I found myself in a position to sell a company, which is not something I ever thought I would do. I didn't know a lot about M&A, and really all I knew was um, what not to do from my experience, or what I had hoped I could avoid doing from my experience on the, receiving end, so to speak, of being subject to this acquisition at my last job. So that was very top of mind going into this. I didn't want to be kind of exploited by the process, but it was also extremely important to me that my team was not harmed by this process. Um, so that informed every single decision I made, including the very first decision was, do I sell and when? So then it was what broker to work with. Then it was obviously which sellers are going to work. Like if they were interested in me, I wouldn't even consider them unless I thought that they met that sort of like humanity criteria. I
Mhm.
didn't care about like the price or what they could offer. Like it was really just about, did they see me and my team as the assets that we are and the people, the humans that we are.
Mhm.
Um, so I really went out of my way to make sure. I mean, I can't say, some of it was out of my control, but like everything that I had control over, everything that I had a say in terms of the way the process proceeded, that was my number one criteria, and then everything else kind of came after that. But the humanity of it, the like making sure that the people who had been loyal to me stayed on the team for all these years. We had some tough years during the pandemic, and people stuck around and trusted me, and I could not in good conscience violate that trust by being like, well, I sold to the highest bidder and you all don't have jobs anymore, which is what happens in a lot of acquisitions. Thankfully, not this one. I was, thanks to the amazing brokers that I worked with, who, by the way, got it. Like I was very transparent with them from the start, and I said, I'm not going to talk to anyone who's just going to lay off my entire team because like there's nothing left. There's nothing left to buy without my team. We're a service business, not like a software business or something. But I said, aside from the logistics of it, I'm not going to do that to my people. So I need to talk to buyers who believe in their teams and value their teams and their people like the way that I do. And so my brokers were amazing, and they really took that seriously, and they heard me and they prioritized that to the best of their ability. And when there were potential buyers that I had concerns with along those lines, they respected that. And like I would say, I don't want to talk to those people again. And they were like, totally get it. I got the same vibe. Like they didn't push me to talk to anyone I was uncomfortable with, anything like that. And best of all, they found the most amazing buyers who approach culture and team building and managing people the same way that I always have. And they acquired not just the company, but the entire team. There were no layoffs. They took me as well, which I was, open to discussing options, but that was my ideal scenario, because I'm not ready to retire or anything. And this wasn't like a massive transaction. So it's not like I was going to go like buy a yacht in Mallorca or something. But I'm very happy and very proud of how this transaction turned out, not only because of the last transaction that I was exposed to, but that is a big part of what drove the way I wanted this transaction to go.
So it sounds like you're very intentional with your next step. As far as mindset, can you talk to me
Mhm.
about mindset and how you've been able to establish your mindset to navigate new scenarios, being, you know, going from a food blogger to then being a solo entrepreneur to then working as a director, strategy director for a startup to owner to being acquired. How have you been able to support your mindset throughout this whole process?
I love that question because I think mindset is something that you have to be very conscious about building. I think that a lot of people talk about mindset in a way that makes it sound like it just comes naturally. So if you don't feel like you have a strong mindset around like how to do something, you kind of feel like you're inadequate. But it's been a lot of intentional um thought, like intentional, like I'm a systems person. I always have this, I have this brain that always wants to like organize everything. And so I've been very intentional about applying that to unknown or uncertain situations. And back to my earlier comment about like I'm a pretty risk averse person, but I also take a lot of risks, at least professionally in the last several years. I think the thing is that I use this strategy and organizational mindset to make the perceived risk feel a lot lower. So I think about like, okay, I kind of game it out if you're familiar with game theory, where it's like, what happens next? Okay, then what happens? Then what else could happen? And then you come up with this almost, it sort of looks like a decision tree in your brain of like, okay, if I take this action, what could be the effect? Okay, well, how will I deal with that? How will I address that or solve that or thrive in that? And
Mhm.
then you kind of go down path B and path C. And so I have to think through and organize all the possibilities. And
Mm.
so it ends up being almost like a problem solution type mindset where it's like, I remember like one of my best quotes is a friend of mine who's a photographer accidentally like deleted her, drive where her photographs were that she was supposed to deliver to a client. And I remember she called me like panicking and I said, there's always a solution. You just haven't found it yet. And
Mm.
so I think that is the core of my mindset around big changes and big decisions. Some of them are really hard solutions to find, but there is always a solution. It may not be a great solution, but there's always a solution. It may not be an easy solution, but there's always a solution. And so I have to like organize all the pieces and then I kind of analyze this like roadmap and then I just figure out what is the most likely solution or end. Where do I want to be? Where do I want to end up? How do I get there? What's the best path forward? So it's very systems based in that sense. I don't just leap. I am not that person who's like, let's give it a shot and see where we end up. When I was a blogger and when I was working full time and blogging on the side, I thought, okay, this job isn't working for me anymore. What are my other options? I could job search, I could be a stay-at-home mom, I could work on my blog. If I work on my blog, what are my options? Okay, what do those options look like if I do this, this, or this? And then I chose the path forward. And then I did it again when I realized, like, okay, I have a problem, and my problem is that I'm not happy being a solopreneur blogger. What are my options? What happens if I choose option A, option B, option C? And so it just becomes this mindset of like, what are the possible solutions and what are the solutions that will like serve me best? And
Mhm.
how do I get there?
Mhm.
And how do I avoid the ones I really, really don't want to happen? So I think that it's a skill. I think mindset is a skill and it's one that you really have to practice. And I've had a lot of practice because there's been a lot of like big issues and big decisions to make in the last several years of my career. But it's also something that I practice, I think, on a day-to-day basis. Choosing positivity, choosing a solution orientation over like a problem, woe is me orientation, things like that.
So when I hear you talk, it reminds me of a practice that I teach. Because in addition to creative and marketing recruitment at Elysian, I'm also a certified dream builder coach and life mastery consultant. And I love that each time before you went down the systems, that map and gamified it, you really leaned into that longing and discontent, right? You were in your job and you're like, longing and discontent were coming up, and you're like, this is not working for me.
Right.
And also with well, you weren't owning the company, but you were the CEO
Hmm.
and you were acting like the owner, but you weren't getting the benefits of an owner. And you're laying awake at bed at night
Hmm.
saying, this isn't working for me.
Right.
And so one of the things that I teach is that life is always seeking for us to experience a greater version of it. And it signifies growth by longing and discontent.
Hmm.
And so we're talking about your career, but I'm sure in between those 2 points of you changing from the food blogger to joining that company to then owning the company to the acquisition, there were probably some personal and relationship longing and discontents that you
Oh
were
yeah,
on,
absolutely.
right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so there's always, at any point in our life, life is looking to express itself in a fuller version of ourselves. And that's where those are where those transition points of us having that opportunity. And so it's great that you are in tune with it. And then you've learned, okay, how does my mindset work? I'm very systemized. I love to organize it. Now, are you by chance a gamer?
I am not. I never have
No.
been.
At any version. I mean, okay, there could be like my grandmother was a gamer, right? Because she loved playing card games.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a lot of different gamers in my life who love to play they'll play PlayStation or they'll play chess or uh, poker, blackjack.
Yeah.
There's so many different types, but you have never,
Never. It's
never.
funny you mentioned that because I very recently, my son is very into playing card games. Like we play card games at dinner a lot. And I'm
Okay.
like, these are really fun. Like, why didn't I mean, I did play card games, but we weren't like a card game family growing up. And so I'm starting to get into card games finally.
Awesome.
Um, no, I think I organize the world in a lot of other ways. Gaming has never been my thing, but yeah, I never recognized that connection before, but that's a really interesting observation. I think I see what you mean. That's really cool.
Well, and gamifying also creates that challenge and then the reward.
Right.
And so you're like looking at the game, and some people will gamify things, and the reward will be like, okay, so once I achieve this, I'll go ahead and give myself a massage, or I'll go on a vacation, or I'll allow
Right.
myself to have a treat, a cookie or
Right.
and so it sounds like you were really looking for that ultimate result reward. Like, this is what I want. So let's
Yeah.
look at the whole map. And it can be fun because if I gamify it, then it's more of a challenge. And if I'm strategic, then I can win this game.
Right. And then it doesn't feel like, oh no, I have this overwhelming problem that I don't know how to solve. Suddenly it's a game. It's
Yeah.
like it's like almost like a maze. It's like, can I take all the right turns? And the turns, of course, are like micro decisions along the way. And like if you take all the right turns, you get to that end that you want to be at. But the other piece that I think I didn't articulate but should have is the intuition part of it, which you describe differently, but I learning to trust my intuition and learning to hear my intuition and trust it has been sort of a lifelong it's not something I was like consciously working on. It was just something that I sort of realized one day. I think I need to be trusting this a little more. So not, suppressing it, not ignoring it, not saying like intuition is the entire decision making process by any means, but taking it seriously as part of um, the decision making and the like it gets put into this organizational sort of structure that I create in my head. It's like what feels like the right way forward? What feels like it would resolve this discon or what did you call it? I forgot the
Yeah, the
discontented state.
longing and
Yeah.
discontent. So longing is something that you want in your life that you don't have, and discontent is a situation in your life that you are not happy with.
So that's, I think, a perfect way to sum up what a lot of this has been for me. It's like professional longing and discontent, but it feels like something is, to use my organizational language, like it feels like something is like out of place or like disorganized. And so I kind of think through like, how would I feel if the situation were this? How would I feel if the situation were that? And that's how I think my gut helps to inform what the right decision should be or hopefully will be. But I think about like, how will I feel, organized with air quotes again in my sort of in the energy that I am feeling. So obviously there's a lot more to it when you're talking about a business. There's financial concerns and all that stuff on paper, but it's not about intuition and listening to when you're feeling that discontent and taking that seriously, that is also a component of it in addition to the more um I would say sort of like traditional decision making data points.
Yeah, intuition is a very important guide, and I'm glad you brought that up. And one of the other tools that I hear you saying is when you're making a decision, actually going down the path of making decision A versus decision B, and then feeling, does this feel expansive or contractive?
Hmm.
And so that's what I hear you saying is that you're checking in with like, how is this feeling?
Yeah.
Because I think many of the times we're taught not to, oh, it's just a feeling, use your mind. But we have
Right.
all these tools. We have our mind, we have intuition, we have longing and discontent, we have strategy, we have gamification.
Hmm.
There's so many tools that we can pull together, and it sounds like you've made a really nice toolbox that works for you.
Yeah, I think thank you for saying that. And I think you're absolutely right that I sort of, I organize it all into this like this sort of map of like I can go this way or this way or this way. And then I kind of think through like if I go down this first road and I make these decisions, what's my best educated guess on where we'll end up and how does that feel? Like, does that feel right? Will something happen as a result of these decisions that I'm not comfortable with, or that will cause bigger problems, or that will sacrifice the things that are important to me, like my team's humanity or my humanity? That's been a really important thing is this gaming it out kind of experience where I don't just go, I have option A, B, or C. I go, okay, what is it? What does option A look like? What does it feel like? What could happen that I'm maybe not immediately thinking of as a result of option A? Like what could happen like 3, 4, 10 decisions down the line? What implication could that have? And is that okay with me too? Even if the first decision in that decision tree, whatever we're, like down that road, maybe the first decision I'm comfortable with, but maybe that leads to a series of other things, whether it's decisions or outcomes. Maybe I'm not actually okay with decision A because of the domino effect that it's going to have. So that's how I really think through things. And then when it comes time to actually like pull the trigger and do something, it really doesn't feel like as much of a risk as it might seem like on the surface because I have thought of every not every, most possible outcomes. And I put a ton of thought into it. And it's funny because like I'll go to my husband with what sounds like a totally like cockamamie, like I remember very vividly, like it was the middle of the workday and he works hybrid, so he's home like 3 or 4 days a week. And I went, his office is in the basement. And I remember just like walking into his office and he was just like, typing an email and turning around and I was like, so I think I'm gonna buy the company. And he's like, hold on, what? But he knows me well enough now to know that when I say it, I've already been mulling it over and gaming it out for like days, weeks, months. I've come to this decision as carefully as I possibly can, even though to him it was like, are you insane? Like, where's this coming from? But it had been in my mind for a really long time.
Mhm. Wonderful. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience?
I guess I would say, since this is a podcast about creatives and creative sort of motivation, I would just say that like maybe on the topic of intuition, don't write yourself off as just any like just a this or just a that because I mean, I think the one big takeaway that I really hope people get from my story is like I was like just a food blogger a few years ago and it was like I went from food blogger to like CEO and owner of a company in like just a couple steps, honestly, because you're never just anything. Like you're not just an artist, just a food blogger. I mean, you're not just a CEO either, really. I think that the thing that I hope people like and value for my story is about how holistic sort of the process has been, how it's been about applying different parts of myself and different strengths in different situations to get where I wanted and needed to go.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you for being a guest on my podcast.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and I'd love to have you on my show again to hear about your journey and your growth.
Yes, absolutely. I'd love that.
And thank you for joining us at Empowering Creatives to Live Their Dreams. I'm Jessica Osrek. You can do it. I believe in you.